Vayamos haciendo un lado, tu color y mi color, tu color y mi color. Vayamos haciendo un lado.
Vayamos haciendo un lado, tu color y mi color, tu color y mi color. Vayamos haciendo un lado.
Ya no tenemos razón para ignorar el amor, para ignorar el amor. Es tiempo de reflexión.
But for now, I'd invite those of you who are with us today to just join me with a round of applause as we welcome Larry Herzog and René Peralta to Las Noticias from the Border. Welcome, Larry and René. I'm going to start welcome. So glad to have you with us. I thought I'd start just by asking each of you just so we can get to know you ever so briefly, that you just tell us a little bit about what's going on in your life. I've been calling this segment ¿Qué hay de nuevo? You know, what's happening, what's keeping you busy? Welcome. I will say, I'll just introduce you briefly, that Larry is a writer and visiting scholar, lecturer in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning Department at UCSD, and a professor emeritus of city planning from San Diego State University. So that's his professional, brief professional bio. But Larry, tell us a little bit about ¿Qué hay de nuevo in your life? What's happening?
Right. Well, I'd say probably the most important thing right now is I'm trying to figure out how to defrost my turkey.
Yes, the challenges of Thanksgiving. Yeah,
my energy. Yeah, I've been writing a book, not specifically about the U.S.-Mexico border, but I do address the border along the way. But it's a book about something we call placemaking in architecture and urbanism, and I'm trying to sort of unravel the impact of 21st century phenomena on how we create places and the built environment, and whether we're losing some authenticity in the trade-off with the digital revolution and with some other things that are going on in the real world. And I do come back to this region because I know it so well. I think placemaking is a really interesting idea when you look at what's happening to Tijuana, so we can talk about that at some point. And I'm also teaching at UCSD. I'm getting ready for winter quarter and spring quarter. I'm going to teach classes in both of those quarters, as well as and then when COVID eventually goes away, I've been talking to UCSD about bringing my podcast over there. I started a podcast 2 years ago called Whose City? And it's basically to get people in the region to think about the fact that it's your city, and we want to bring up issues that are relevant to the future of the San Diego-Tijuana region. So UCSD has been very interested in maybe having me bring it over there and use one of their labs or one of their studios to tape episodes. So that would be really wonderful, and that's something else that I'm thinking of maybe next year.
Cool. Yeah, great. Well, and if you'll send me after the fact the link to your podcast, I'd love to check it out myself, and I'll share it with our followers. We have many people here who are aficionados and compañeros in our binational region. So I'd love to learn more about that. Thanks.
Yeah, I have to say that we put it on hold for now. So I don't think it's accessible on the internet at the moment, because when we suspended it, we also stopped paying for the software that you use to keep it up there. So As soon as we get it back online, but I can send you the information about it. We did tape a few of them. I don't know. I think we might have recordings of them, but we don't have it. It's not accessible online at the moment.
Gotcha. Well, we'll look forward to it when it becomes available. And yeah, please do keep in touch on that front. Thanks. And thanks again, Larry, for taking this time to join us. Bienvenido. Welcome. And I'm going to add René to the conversation. And René, I'll put the same question to you. René Peralta studied architecture at the New School of Architecture in San Diego and the Architectural Association in London. And he is a co-author of a book called Here is Tijuana, published in 2006. I learned chatting with René briefly beforehand that his family home is Tijuana, has been in the generations of Tijuanenses. And René is joining us today from where he's his teaching gig in Oklahoma. But René, welcome, and share with us, ¿Qué hay de nuevo? What's going on with you these days, René? What's keeping you busy?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, just fine, thank you.
Okay, great. This is I'm starting my second year here in Norman, Oklahoma at the University of Oklahoma as the Herb Green Teaching Fellow, which is an honor to have been able to receive. I've never been in this part of the country before, in the heartland of America. So it's very, very interesting for me being from the border. And I was working on a project here with the university on a comparative study on U.S.-Mexico borders and borders in China. But with the whole COVID-19 situation, well, that sort of put on hold.
Yeah.
So for now, we're working on, I'm working with students mostly. We've been doing some work with a company called Hyperloop. I don't know if you sort of know the technology. I worked with Hyperloop a few years ago. We wanted to implement a route from Ensenada to Los Angeles that only take 18 minutes to get from both sides on this technology. So you can go and have your wine at Valle de Guadalupe in 18 minutes from LA. But we're still working with Hyperloop on student projects. And currently I'm finishing up a accelerator program at the Rady School of Management at UCSD and with the National Science Foundation, trying to implement, let's say, revive a project that I did a few years ago. If you can see the image on the back that I have of the Tijuana Solar River, of turning the canal of the Tijuana Canal into the largest solar farm in Mexico and making it produce energy and not just wastewater. So that's what we've been working on.
That's great. Again, projects I'd love to follow, and thanks to you, Rene, for taking time to join us. I know that as I checked out each of your work, thank you for sending me a little bit of information beforehand. I know as design professionals in this region, you both are very heavily invested in binational collaboration. And I learned that you guys work together and have a strong sense of collaboration amongst yourselves. But just again, by way of introduction, would you just tell us a little bit about how you all met, how do you think of yourselves working together as collaborators along and across the border? What's your own personal collaboration like?
Go ahead, Rene.
Well, Larry has been one of the pillars of cross-border urbanism and architecture. I always say Larry wrote that first book on that impossible task of Tijuana architecture. From Aztec to high tech is a book that hasn't been sort of challenged again, and it was a great it's a great entry to any design and planning professional into the city of Tijuana. It has some great interviews with some great architects from the city. So that's how. And of course, we have a lot of mutual friends, and we always end up in Tijuana in some bar.
Yeah,
because everybody sort of. But it's always because we go to a friend's house and because he has an exhibition. It's always because of some kind of cultural happening.
Yeah.
That we meet, and then we end up, of course, sort of going into the Tijuana night. But and we were also, I was lucky to work with Larry on the Temporary Paradise book that came out in 2018 with Colaf. So that was another great project that needed to be done, and we made it happen. So we've always sort of been collaborating in any way possible.
Yeah, Larry, do you recall the first time you met Rene, or how did you first get connected, or how have you remained connected all these years?
Yeah, well, I agree with everything that Rene said. I think we're a small fraternity, cross-border kind of urbanists, architects, urban planners. I'm a little bit unusual because I'm a gringo that speaks pretty damn good Spanish, practically fluent, wouldn't you say, Rene? And so I can go hang out with the Mexicanos, and I remember one of my Tijuana friends many years ago said, "Larry, eres pinche, pero hablas español y ya estás parte de nuestro grupo," no? So it's sort of like over a long period of time, I became an accepted person in different contexts. So, and Rene is right, a lot of it is social, but I also want to, you know, throw some, you know, respect back toward Rene, because of all the architects and urban planners that I've met over the years. He really started to stand out for me as I would listen to him speak at different events. Rene is a real special guy. He knows Tijuana. He's very smart. He's very academically skilled, but he's also practical. He understands urban space and how to design things, and he just brings together a lot of different skill sets that I really admire. So over time, I admire him professionally, and I also like him a lot personally. So we're pretty good friends, and it's true that we meet, and almost any time we're at the same function, we end up finding ourselves kind of hanging out. You know,
Yeah.
I've been to his house. I've tried to get him to come to my house a couple of times. He was on his way, and then something happened, and he and Monica couldn't attend. It was maybe one of their daughters had something else going on. He's a busy guy.
Yeah.
But after COVID, Rene, you're coming to my house. I'm gonna, you know, I'll find a way to get you there one way or the other.
Great. We've got it on tape now. We've got a commitment on tape. So,
but we did work together on Temporary Paradise, as you know, was this famous report that Kevin Lynch and Donald Appleyard did way back in the 70s. And we finally realized, a bunch of us realized, that it was time to honor that work, but also to kind of rethink some of those ideas. So we came up with the idea of co-editing republication, and then maybe inviting some experts to add their thoughts in short essays. So I think we did, I don't know whether it was 6 or 8 essays from each side of the border. We brought some of the top people in, some of the top urban scholars from both sides. And it was a lot of fun. We had meetings, we exchanged ideas, and then eventually we did a big celebration with Citizens Coordinate for Century 3 at the Mission Park. They have a beautiful facility there, and we had a wonderful outdoor event there where we honored, actually the son of Donald Appleyard is a professor at SDSU, former colleague of mine, Bruce Appleyard. He was there, and we were all there, and it was a great moment. It was before COVID, you know, we could actually, I've seen photographs, we were all sitting next to each other, enjoying the camaraderie, the cross-border camaraderie, and I really miss that, and I hope, you know, obviously we all miss all the things that we were able to do before, but I think in particular, the border is really hurting, and really the wound is deep and needs to be healed in many different ways.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much again. For those of us, most of the folks who would check out a little show like this would be already really invested in the borderlands, but not all by any means. I count myself included, or would think of themselves as experts in urban design. And so for most of us, the uninitiated, we might just think of urban infrastructure. We might think of, you know, the big visible projects like the San Isidro Port of Entry, or the Cross-Border Express out at the Tijuana Airport, or Friendship Park out on the coast. As you all, maybe we start there just to, you know, to orient those of us who aren't experts. As you all, is one of those projects something that you followed across the years and looked at and scratched your head at, or wish they, you know, like, man, they really could have done a lot more with that? Or, you know, when you think of some of the most visible expressions of cross-border design and infrastructure, is there one that jumps out at you as a missed opportunity maybe, or something you'd like to see, you know, get a do-over on? Either of you have one that sticks out in your mind?
Well, so the problem of, if I might just step back for one quick second, and
sure.
The problem of the border is that there's this ongoing tension between two forces that we academics talk about, which is debordering and rebordering. So debordering refers to the idea that you take away the physical hard boundary and you think of the region as more kind of overlapping interests, overlapping markets, overlapping movement of people, overlapping interests, overlapping culture. And so there's a whole set of people who advocate that, including Via International, right? And then there's this thing called rebordering, where there are people who are anti-immigrant, anti-Mexican, and they want to bring back the 19th century physical border. Let me think, there's a certain president who's been trying to build a wall for the last 4 years. So that tension between those two things has always existed, and it really kicked back in after 9/11 when former President Bush created the Department of Homeland Security. Yeah. So the reason I mention that is because I did a study in 2009 that showed that there were, or that documented the fact that there were over $10 billion worth of unfunded cross-border infrastructure, just in terms of ports of entry and highways that could reach the ports of entry. So there's a huge gap along the border. And in particular, the other thing that that troubles me is that this idea that a lot of the government agencies that manage the border, they think of it in a kind of military way, like it has to have, fences, and it has to look like some sort of a jail kind of atmosphere. So when you cross the border, you feel like you're in a negative space. You feel very like people are looking at you. There's security cameras, there's walls, and it doesn't have to be like that. It could be a lived space. It could be a more friendly place that the two cultures could come together. So my big point about missed opportunities is that we need to completely rethink the design paradigm at the boundary itself, how we embrace each other and how we physically design, and how what it looks like and what you do there. I think we could, and I'll tell you about my airport metaphor in a little while, but I want to give Rene a chance to jump in.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's so helpful. That it's before these the folks designers who design stuff along the border usually aren't very design oriented, are they? They're very, as you said, they're born out of a certain culture, an institutional culture of Homeland Security and a military or background. I don't know. It's a shame. I appreciate your insight on that. Rene, what comes to your mind when you think about missed opportunities on the San Diego-Tijuana border?
Well, sometimes as a person, as a citizen of Tijuana, I came. The border is always on our minds, always. Since I was a little boy, I used to cross the border to go to school in San Isidro at Mount Carmel School, this Catholic school. And so we're always sort of, the border is always in our everyday of our lives. And what I've been interested in more than anything is not necessarily being close to the physical border or the boundary, which I know is important, but how it affects the rest of the city. Because the boundary builds the city. It's called Tijuana. And everything, and where I go, I look at how the border has shaped communities. For instance, if you look at manufacturing, how when manufacturing plants in the 60s came to Tijuana, they practically built, large parts of the city and town and gave work to a lot of people, and they built sort of part of the city and the economy. So I've always been interested in those impacts further away from the line.
Yeah.
And how they're still very, very strong and in shaping the urban realm of the city. And not only the form of the city, but also the culture of the people, right? It also, like Larry was saying, there's a lot of hybridization. That's another kind of border word of customs and cultures that happen because of this border, and it's very interesting how that happens every day. People coming in from the south of Mexico, coming in here to Tijuana and learning the customs that we started to build because of the border, and then sort of creating all these other new ways of sort of thinking about sort of the city and identity and all these things. And even art and culture and music and all those things have an impact because of the border.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in that part rather than the physical or physicality. I know it has its place, and of course I wouldn't want that military border that Larry is saying either. But for now, I think I'm looking at sort of a little bit further away, but there's still a huge impact.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. So let's look forward, turn to the forward-looking conversation, the more creative conversation. What do you see as opportunities moving forward? Where do you see energy flowing and new impulses within this urbanism and design network that you described earlier? What are folks like you hoping for and dreaming for when you think to the future of the region?
Yeah, I think I'm in large sort of kind of regional ideas. I really hope that Tijuana, San Diego become a much more free to make their own decisions.
Hmm.
Decisions about our environment, decisions about the shared water, the shared we share the Tijuana water, the Tijuana River watershed, for instance, right? We share the air, we share the ocean. I mean, it would be great that in the future we could decide by ourselves what to do with these resources. Because right now, Tijuana has to go ask permission to the federal government
Yeah.
to do a lot of things at the border. Maybe San Diego doesn't. Maybe San Diego has more control. But I think in the future, I hopefully, we become strong enough that we can sort of guide our own future. And I think that that is something that that I find to be very, very interesting. But it has to have um, it, it has to have meaning and from both sides. And sometimes I see San Diego, for instance, I never see San Diego sort of uh, presenting itself as a border city,
Yeah.
right? I see San Diego as a city by the ocean or America's greatest city, but I never see it claim itself as a border city, which it is.
Yeah.
So I think those perceptions and those things have to change in order for us to then really, really become a world-class sort of region.
Yeah. Yeah, we often lament, you all, I'm sure, join in the lament that so many decisions are made by our federal government in Washington, D.C. But
Yeah,
sometimes it's the fact that decisions are made in downtown San Diego, which is only 14 miles away, but sometimes might, seems like it's in another universe because, so many of our San Diego leaders don't identify or their constituents don't identify with the borderlands and the border region. So, Larry, what's your sense of energies and opportunities emerging in this space, which is, I know we often feel like we're swimming upstream. Those of us who'd like to try to think binationally or create binationally, feels like we're often swimming against the tide. But where do you see is there some energy flows and opportunities moving forward?
Yeah, no, by the way, I agree with Rene that we also need to look at the rest of the city and not just the immediate space at the border. But
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about how we could better connect our two cities. And because I'm an urban planner and a designer, I often tend to think about physical space and about design solutions. So one thing that occurs to me that I think is practical and maybe plausible is to think about a transit system that could connect the two cities. This is something that's been discussed for years. Um, you know, in like nowadays, when you arrive at the Tijuana airport, if you want to go to San Diego, there's no real transit connection from the airport to Tijuana. There's also not really a transit connection from anywhere in Tijuana into San Diego, other than walking across the border and getting on the trolley. And by the way, when you walk across the border, which I've done hundreds of times, and you try to get to the trolley station, it's not that easy to walk along San Isidro Boulevard. So
Yeah.
on both sides of the border, there needs to be much better attention to the pedestrian friendly space around the boundary. That's why I always come back to talking. I think it starts at the border and then it kind of cascades into each city. We need to think of ourselves, and I wrote a book in 1990 called Where North Meets South, and I admittedly was very idealistic. I was trying to talk about this idea of kind of a transnational metropolis, and it was kind of just an idealization. I wasn't arguing that it existed in any real way, but I was hoping that maybe the model that's used in Europe in places like Basel, Switzerland, which has a cross-border urban complex with the German and the French sides of the border, the airport is shared by all three cities. And so I kind of wanted to think of it that way. And I kind of created this idea that maybe we could think of ourselves as a kind of single unified region, and that would inspire our politicians and all of us on the US side to really address the economic inequality on the Mexican side and really try to find some ways to cooperate. And I still believe that. I still believe in that idea, whether or not an actual transnational metropolis really exists as a thing. I don't think that was the point of that book or anything else I've ever written. The point is to argue that we should be thinking of ourselves as a place that could be better connected. People like Rene inspire me all the time because he is a cross-border person in his work and in the way he thinks and in his, his interest in energy and solar and all those other things. So I think transit might be a good place to start, because I think we could build some sort of a San Diego Tijuana transit system that maybe builds on the trolley and maybe figures out where are the nodes in Tijuana that we could immediately connect to, whether it's the river zone, downtown Tijuana, the airport, Playas de Tijuana. Find 6 or 8 nodes and build a network that gets you to those places, and then figure out how you cross the border, both on the Otay Mesa as well as on the downtown San Isidro crossing, and then put that thing together and get everyone to think about that and get funding for that. So that's one, I think, big issue. And the other one is, I think, is sewage. We really need to solve the sewage flow problem. That's kind of an engineering, environmental engineering problem. But the mayor of Imperial Beach is a good friend of mine. He's another former student. And he is really working hard on that issue down there. And, I go to Imperial Beach a lot. And, some days when you walk along the estuary, the smell is so powerful, and it's not good for either side of the border. So we really have to manage our physical environment. And I think we could start with transit that's something, I think that's a win-win. I think both sides would benefit from that. Trying to cross the border by car, it's not sustainable in the long term. And that's not a good way for us to build our relationship. And the big advantage we have is that Tijuana really is so much better set up for transit because it's a more compact urban area. Although it is spreading, it's still much more compact. If you look at an aerial photograph of the San Diego Tijuana region, it's just absolutely startling how spread out our side of the border. We go all the way to Oceanside, and people are moving further and further up toward the mountains and the desert. And then Tijuana, really the urban core of Tijuana, is much more compartmentalized. So that gives you, as a transit designer, it gives you a lot of possibilities of creating stations that people could actually get to. And then we just have to find destinations. In San Diego, you already have a trolley line, so you can build off that. So I see a lot of potential there. I know Sandag has a terrific director who's running it, and he has a real vision of how to make transit work in the region. So I think this is a great moment, hopefully, to start to think about using transit as a connector between the two regions.
Yeah, let me ask you a little bit more about infrastructure, maybe especially on the Mexican side. Again, somebody who's not expert in these fields at all. I often harken back. I happened to be in Tijuana in 2008. It was just before the crash. And I heard the then mayor of Tijuana talking about a new development on the eastern edge of the metropolis, which was then out past Otay. And I don't know if he was accurate in this, but he was bragging at the time to an audience that this was the first time in the history of Tijuana that we're planning a community before people move into it. That the rest of the history of the city is people moving in, and then we build infrastructure in and around them. It's just thinking again, for layman's terms or the uninitiated, Rene, is there planning? Is there a comparable organization in Tijuana to Sandag? How do major infrastructure and regional planning processes work in Tijuana? Are there opportunities there, obstacles, both?
Yes. Well, Tijuana has what is called the IMPLAN. Not only do they have IMPLAN, but they also have a urban development office in the city. IMPLAN works a little bit outside the government. It's funded by federal money, but also funded by local money. And it is just it used to be a municipal planning agency, so just the city. And now it has become a metropolitan one. So I think from now on, when we ever talk about the border, we talk about Tijuana, we need to talk about Tecate, Rosarito, and Ensenada, all as that one sort of metropolitan area.
Yeah.
The federal government and the state government now wants to connect these cities, with of course transportation nodes, but also give the cities each their identity so that they could sustain themselves. So Ensenada has the port, Ensenada has the tourism and the wine. Rosarito also has become a place where a lot of people that work in Tijuana are now living, right? Tijuana is becoming much more of kind of a financial center with a lot more larger, taller buildings, things like that. Tecate is still kind of rural, but Tecate has, it's a city that is growing rapidly as well. And because it's one of the municipalities that has a lot of land, and it's also next to a border. So I think the planning right now, the vision for the future is in the metropolitan area, in the zone.
Yeah.
And so they're putting a lot of their, like we say, in Spanish, a lot of their marbles in that. But the city does have a metropolitan, a municipal planning agency. And in the last, I would say, 8 years, it's been directed by really, really young guys. I mean, you're talking about these dudes in their 20s.
Yeah.
You just came out of architecture school, and we're and we're not affiliated to any political party, and they got the job as the director or co-director, and they were into applications, and they were they like to go to the city, to the east side, and they like to go everywhere, and they started to let's plan and map the city like never done before, and they started to put this information online for free, which in Tijuana was something that was really difficult to do. I mean, data was you could make a lot of money just by selling data to people, especially you worked in government. But these guys put it out there. Now nonprofits could use it, developers could use it, etc. So there's been a change in the last few years of these young planners who really want to take ownership of the city and guide it, first by making it available and democratic so that all the information is there, and mapping everything that needs to be mapped before we can start making big moves. So that's what's happening right now.
Well, so tell me more again about some of these other initiatives. There's this regional urban planning, Nexus, Sandag, and Implan, or other. There's at that level. Of course, there are other things that are familiar to San Diegans, maybe Tijuana Innovadora efforts at trying to promote a binational discourse around commerce or energy, et cetera. Joanna in our chat room is mentioning the dream that sometimes people have talked about. Would something ambitious like hosting a binational Olympics cause the resources to come into the region that would cause us or help us to get the infrastructure that we would need? Where do you all see binational collaborations emerging, and or what hope for the future is there that other truly binational spirited collaborations in your space? Where the green shoots sprouting up of this future binational transnational metropolis, as you call it, Larry?
Yeah, well, it's been on hold for the last 4 years because everyone's just trying to survive this tsunami of negative energy and fake walls, and that Rene took a couple of us down to see the wall from the Tijuana side because you couldn't get near it on the U.S. side. So one day we drove out there and we stood up on these boulders or whatever, and we were taking photographs of the wall, and then there were all these incredible artistic murals on the Tijuana side that were basically put there as that went with these horrible wall prototypes. And so we were really just kind of amazed at that whole fiasco. It was amazing. And then we just went and drank a lot of beer afterwards because it was so depressing to see that wall. But so that it's been a big setback. But when I look at I've been around for a while, and so when I look at the energy here, first of all, I wanted to mention something Rene said, that one thing that really gives me hope is the young people of Mexico, of Tijuana. I've met so many young architects and artists and writers and planners who really are, first of all, they speak perfect. Their English is amazing. I mean, the United States is the most monolingual nation in the hemisphere, but that's not true in Mexico. A lot of Mexicans, look at Rene. I mean, his English is impeccable, you know? And so I think, but it's not just language, it's the ability to use computers, it's the way they think, their kind of global understanding of things. So that gives me a lot of hope that I think there's a lot of talent and energy to do things like engineering and architecture and planning and creative energy development and many other things. And so I think that there have been in the 90s and 2000s, there were a lot of exciting ideas about things that we could do in this region, including Rene's, ideas about the river zone, the channel. The channel is kind of like a wasted space in a way. It doesn't fill up all that often with water, so it seems like it could be have some other uses. And a lot of other similar creative ideas about things with colonias. I know there's work being done by some professors from UCSD on going around to different communities in Tijuana and trying to help people rebuild in more creative ways, using creative community architecture, field stations, that sort of thing. There's work being on the US side that's also trying to look at, how to grow food and where food could be grown, working across the border. We really need to tackle the colonias. The colonias of Tijuana really are an untapped resource that needs to be addressed. The problems of colonias, but also the potential of colonias. So I think we need a kind of a Marshall Plan for the border. We need to really come up, maybe that's not the right term, sounds too dramatic, but we need a vision. We need some vision, cross-border vision that could be somewhat philanthropic, driven by NGOs, but also by local organizations such as Implan and others in Tijuana. And Sandag, I think, has a borders committee. They have a lot of good intentions. And now maybe things will open up, with a change in administrations, and we can remove this sort of stain of all this negative energy and start to deal with many of the problems which are social, but also I think environmental and cross-border planning and design should be in the mix as well.
Boy, one of my hopes is that somehow this conversation that you're describing, Larry, that's so badly needed, would somehow get dislodged on our end, on the US end, from the Department of Homeland Security. As you mentioned, that was such a signal moment in the history of the border when everything related to the border got thrust under Department of Homeland Security, and subsequently then everything, you can't have a conversation without it, get devolving into these ridiculous questions about, how big the wall should be, or how big a barrier should that be, or just the space to have a conversation is constrained by the framework of national security. That's my experience. And so it'd be lovely, wouldn't it, if there was something, again, whatever the metaphor, Marshall Plan, or a special initiative, a special commission that was established to just create something that wasn't constrained in that way. That could be a huge advance, just to kick the tires, or kick the door open a little bit, I should say, and, get some creative conversation going. Rene, how about on the Mexican side? Oh yeah, sorry, Larry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that I don't know whether it's still the case, but back when I was doing some research even on ports of entry, I discovered that the agency in the federal government that manages the ports of entry is the General Services Administration, which has been in the news lately. But the General Services Administration manages all federal buildings, and they include ports of entry in that portfolio. And the problem is, up until recently, there was nobody in the General Service Administration who had any training or understanding of the border. So they were managing buildings on the Texas border and on the San Diego border from Washington, D.C. They had a small office locally, and they didn't know much about what they needed to do to make those ports of entry work in the region. And so I think that's a huge problem, but I'll let Rene talk about the Mexican side and Tijuana side.
You mentioned, Rene, that oftentimes decisions have to be referred or channeled through Mexico City, through the federal government. Is that a ongoing challenge for Tijuanenses and planners in Tijuana?
Yes, it's always a challenge, because the way planning works in Mexico, the federal government sets up sort of the main, let's say the main ideas of what the 6 years of the president's going to be. So it could be on housing, or it could be on education, etc. So if it comes into something that has to do with urban planning, then that is the big umbrella, and then it gets brought down to the states, and then gets brought down to the cities. So whatever the cities needs go, are second place now. They have to first deal with what the federal sort of projects need to be done. But I wouldn't say it was always like that. I'm talking about the border in the 1960s with PRONAF, with the Proyecto Nacional Fronterizo. And this was a time when the federal government decided to modernize all the cities along the US-Mexico border and get those cities ready for industry. And they hired some of the most amazing architects. The guy who led the whole project was an architect called Mario Pani. And Mario Pani was a very famous Mexican planner and architect who did some amazing modernist buildings in Mexico City. And he's the one who was in charge of the project. And basically they designed some beautiful buildings and some infrastructure along the border. And if you look at the Tijuana River, the canal, of course, it wasn't only the canal, but it was also that whole urban area around the canal, which we call Zona Rio, that now has become the actual Tijuana center, the new downtown and financial center of the city. So there were some really good decisions made before, but now, we're kind of lacking that vision. We're kind of left alone and haven't been able sort of to produce that vision with our neighbors to the north.
Yeah. Well, Larry, Renee, thank you both so much. I'm going to close this out. If you're willing to stick around a few more minutes, we have some conversation going in the chat room on Zoom and like to continue in conversation, but I'll just want to sign off from our Facebook and YouTube audience quickly with a round of applause to say thank you both. Gracias a los dos for being with us. And for just, again, for those of us who aren't expert in this field, I find it very exciting and encouraging that there are people like yourselves and instigating these kinds of conversations, looking to the future. And let's all hope there's more room for maneuver, room to breathe, room for maneuver, room to create. All of that sounds very very hopeful, and I share that hope and optimism with you. Just to our Zoom and our Facebook audience, we'll be here next Tuesday, Tuesday 12 noon. Las Noticias from the border. Next week, my guest is Jason De Leon from UCLA and his project mapping deaths in the Arizona desert that resulted from the changed migration patterns and U.S. border wall construction. So join us next Tuesday. We'll also launch Via International's year-end giving campaign as part of Giving Tuesday. That's next Tuesday, December 1st. But for now, we'll say thanks so much and hasta luego. We'll see you next time on Las Noticias from the border.
Más unidos que nunca, en un latín.